Right. Yes, I am Manjula Harikrishna. I am the program manager for Community Building Initiative at India Bioscience. And on behalf of India Bioscience, I warmly welcome you all for today's webinar, Crafting a Successful Fellowship Application. For those who are new to India Bioscience, we are a national program which is hosted at NCBS and primarily supported by Department of Biotechnology, Government of India. We work towards strengthening the life science ecosystem in India through initiatives that support researchers, facilitate scientific communication, build communities, and create opportunities for professional development. So today's webinar is being organized in partnership with EMBO as a part of our ongoing collaboration to support researchers and strengthen opportunities for professional development within the life science community. So, fellowship are an important part of researchers' career journey, but preparing a strong application often can be challenging. It is not about having a good research, it is not always having a great idea, right? Research idea. It is also about communicating your vision, motivation. To putting through motivation potential and also the impact of your work effectively. Today's webinar is therefore designed to provide practical guidance on how to approach a fellowship application and what can make an application stronger. We are pleased to welcome David and Tiago with us today to share their experience and expertise. David Del Alamo brings extensive experience in international uh, fellowship and scientific publishing and research training, including leading the EMBO fellowship program. Tiago Calvaro has a strong background in graduate education, scientific publishing, and mentoring early career researchers in securing fellowship. With that, I would like to hand it over to David and Tiago. Over to you both. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Manila. So let me share my screen.
Yep.
You see the slides?
Yes.
Okay. So my name is David de la Lama, as Manuela said. I'm originally a developmental biologist, a scientist by training. And after a few years working as a postdoc, I decided to change careers. I became an editor for the EMBO journal, although I have worked in several venues after that. The relevant part here for this seminar is that I was the director of the EMBO Fellowship Program for 5 years. Together, Tiago and I, we have seen, Tiago will introduce himself later. We have seen applications at scale. We have seen hundreds or thousands of applications to postdoctoral and other types of fellowships. So we have seen all possible mistakes. That's our strength here. And that's the reason we are talking to you about how to write a successful fellowship application. This is a summary of the course, of a course that we normally do over 2 days. So this will be very condensed. Basically, you will hear from us for about 40 minutes, and then we will have a session of Q&A. And we will cover essentially the part on how to identify the right fellowship. We will talk a little bit about how to find your supervisor, because the first step to apply for a fellowship is to identify someone you want to apply with, how to identify your future supervisor, the person you want to do a postdoc with. After that, we will talk about the application itself, how to identify the fellowship, how to understand the eligibility rules, how to understand the selection process and the importance of understanding it, and how to understand the application process and the potential problems that happen there. And finally, we will discuss a little bit about how to write your project, how to write your application, and the use of artificial intelligence in that. Very in a very summarized way. Maybe Tiago, if you want to introduce yourself very quickly, and then we can start.
Hi, so yes, I'm Tiago Carvalho. So I met David when I worked at EMBO as a writer. We have many complementary expertises. Like David, I was also a scientific editor. I was also a scientific writer for many publications over several years. And for the purposes of this course, well, first, like David, I'm also originally from a research background. I'm not a developmental biologist. I'm an immunologist. I did my PhD and my postdoc in immunology. But for 8 years, I ran graduate education programs for the Gulbenkian Foundation, for the Champalimaud Foundation, and their selection processes. So I've seen a lot of applications at the earlier stage, and I've helped many people prepare later at the postdoc stage. So David and I have a very good picture of what happens to applications in between applying to a PhD and applying to a postdoc. They're very different. That's one of our emphasis. And I don't want to take up too much time because I want to make sure that we have questions, and I'll get back to you later on the second half of this presentation. But it's great to be with everybody.
Good. So the first thing we want to discuss here, why are you listening to us? Well, the problem is that, as Manuela mentioned, it's not enough anymore to have a fantastic product. You need more than that. You can have a fantastic idea, you can have a very good project, but the problem is the success rates are very low. In many cases, have dropped below 10% in international competitive fellowships, and the cutoff marks are now very close to 100%. So they're not basically a cutoff. It's that either you are perfect or you don't get the fellowship. So, for example, for Marie Curie fellowships, the main European ones, if you want to come to Europe, is one of the main fellowships you can apply to. The cutoff rate in the last round was 96.8, if I remember properly, out of 100. So basically, you need to be perfect. That means that you have to go well beyond any interesting idea you have and be perfect in everything that the fellowship asks you to comply with. And you will see that, particularly for Marie Curie, Tiago will tell you about that. You will see it's quite complex. It's not just about the science. There's a lot of factors that are involved in that case, and that happens to many other fellowships. EMBO fellowships have also dropped the success rates significantly because there has been an increase in the number of applications. They increase basically every year, but in the past couple of years, because of the situation in the US with immigration, the difficulty moving there, then applications in Europe have increased substantially, much more than expected. So the situation is very difficult. So now you have to pay attention to every single potential problem in order to craft a successful fellowship application. And this starts with finding your supervisor. Obviously, you need to go to a place. And of course, when you're thinking about how to find your supervisor, science is important. Of course, you have to go to a lab with a topic that is interesting for you. You have to look at the track record of the lab, publications, discoveries of the lab, the international recognition, how well is established within the field. But that's not the only thing you have to pay attention to. There are other things that are very important, like the ability of mentorship of your future PI, the lab size, whether the lab is very small or very large. Maybe you want a very large lab because you're going to be totally independent, and that's good for you. Maybe you need a smaller lab because you need guidance. You feel better if you can talk to your boss every day. That's something that is a personal decision you have to make. Composition of the lab, maybe in the lab there's 100 technicians and 2 postdocs, and basically it's a factory of producing data. And that's very interesting if you want to publish a lot, but maybe it's not so interesting because you're not going to have a lot of people to discuss new ideas with. It's not going to be as original in terms of new ideas as other labs. So all these things you have to take into consideration. Of course, the institution in which you are going to be, the common areas, the core facilities that they can provide to you, the presence of other labs that work on the same topic and can help you, or you can discuss with, basically bounce ideas with. And then, of course, the area, if you're in an area, there is the dense population of labs. For example, if you go to New York, within 1 hour, basically, you can you have the Mount Sinai Hospital, you have Columbia University, you have NYU, you have Skirball, you have the Rockefeller University, you have the Sloan Kettering Memorial Cancer Center. So there's many places with many different scientists. There's a high density of scientists. The same if you go to Boston or San Diego, places like that. Yeah. If you're gonna go in the middle of nowhere and you are the only you're in the only research institute in that area, then you may feel isolated. But on the other hand, it could be the perfect place for you because it's a devoted institution for cancer, and that's what you're interested in, and they have very good scientists there. So it's something you have to value yourself. And of course, the city and the country, also for personal reasons. Yeah, you have to go to a place where you will be happy culturally and also in terms of weather and many other factors. Just take all these things into consideration. It's not just about science. So we have a question already. Maybe we should wait until the end of the presentation, so we keep an order here. Yeah. So the second, this is just practical tips about how to find your supervisor. Yeah, check the website of the lab. You could look for the alumni section. See what happened to the people that used to work in the lab. This is a very good indicator of the mentorship capability of your PI. Ask around colleagues in your own institution that work in the same field. For example, if you're moving to a different field, they can help you with identifying your future supervisor. They provide essential information. They might know them directly. They may have even worked with them. So it's a very good source of information. Find out the fate of the authors of previous papers in the lab. So if you look papers published in the lab like 10 years ago, you can see what happened to the first authors of these papers. That's going to be you in a few years. Yeah? So if they all quit science, that might be a very bad sign, yeah, depending on what happened. Maybe they all went to pharma companies, and that's what you want because the lab is very well connected in that sense. That's a very good fate for you. Or maybe they all continue their academic career, and that's what you want, and then it's the perfect lab for you. That's something you need to decide for yourself. What's better for you? Of course, take advantage of the interview. If you're invited to for an interview to different labs, you should go to these labs, yeah, and talk to the people there, yeah, and figure out what's the environment in the lab, what kind of atmosphere you can identify and see if that's a good fit for you. Yeah? And of course, talk to current and former members of the lab at conferences or talks or whatever you can find them in an informal setting. Try to figure out what's the environment in the lab. Yeah. So once you have identified the lab, of course, you have to look for a fellowship. Yeah. Where do you start? Well, but you have to start doing your homework. You have to identify the right fellowship for you. This is the first step. Remember, you're doing this at the end of your PhD. Usually, it's normally a very busy time. You're writing your PhD. You are trying to find a new lab to go to. You are probably finishing a paper. You're trying to maybe deal with all the logistics of moving to a new country, asking for visas, all these things. And on top of that, you have to apply to a fellowship. So it's not productive if you basically apply to every possible fellowship out there. There are hundreds of fellowships, literally. Depending on the place where you go, there will be local fellowships, there will be national fellowships, there will be even fellowships from the place where you go, the university where you go. There are international fellowships. So if you apply to everything, you won't have time to actually craft very good applications because it takes time to write an application. Yeah. So the first thing is identify the right one, and you have to start with the mission and scope of the organization that will fund you. Yeah? You have to understand what are the goals of the organization that is going to pay for you. So if you apply for Marie Curie fellowships, obviously it's in their in their goals to favor the European Union, because those are the countries that are actually putting money to finance this type of fellowship. Other fellowships have other roles, and a fellowship from lung cancer association will be focused on lung cancer. You have to understand what they're looking for. And essentially, it all boils down to, if you want my money, you have to demonstrate that you're interested in the same things I am interested. And also, it's not only about that, it's also about the way you write it. You have to put an emphasis on the things that are important to the person that is going to pay you. That's how it works. So you have to, if it's a fellowship interested in clinical development of things, then you have to put emphasis on the clinical aspects of your research, if you have any. If you don't have any, then don't apply to that type of fellowship. But maybe the same type of research you're doing also has a fundamental component. Maybe you're understanding, for example, the fundamental biology behind cardiovascular disease that has a clinical component that may allow you to apply to certain type of fellowships, but it also has a fundamental biology component in understanding how cardiovascular disease atheroma plaques are produced or whatever. That may allow you to apply to a fellowship like EMBO, for example, that it's involved in understanding fundamental science, or HFSP, or other types of fellowships that are focused on fundamental knowledge. For Marie Curie, for example, they don't care about that. They will fund both applied, clinical, or fundamental knowledge. That's not important in terms of topic. But you need to understand these things before you apply. Otherwise, you may make a mistake. And even with a project that could be fundable in principle, it's not fundable because you applied with the wrong emphasis. Then you have to, it's also useful to describe the expected impact, because the impact is what the organization is looking for. What they want is to have an impact on the clinical treatment of lung cancer, or they want to have an impact on the understanding of protein translation and at the ribosome. But they need to have an impact. That's the whole point of giving you money, is to have an impact on society or scientific knowledge or in clinical practice or in whatever. So that way, the way you describe the impact you're going to have is important, and it depends on the organization that you are applying to. So understanding the funder's mission and scope is easy. You just go to the website. These are different examples of different fields. You just go read what they propose. It's not complicated. It's just understanding that the American Society for Mass Spectrometry is interested in developing mass spectrometry. They don't care if you use it for your own research. They care if you work on mass spectrometry to make it better. Or the EMBO, they want to promote fundamental biology, as I mentioned before, to understand the mechanism of a biological process, behind a biological process. That's what they're interested in. So these are the type of things you need to understand, and also try to understand also the priorities of the fund. There are particular areas that are more important for some funders. And if you are here, for example, this is from the European Commission, there are these 5 areas in the current funding framework. These 5 areas are important for them. And actually, one of the questions they ask the reviewer of your application is whether your research falls within one of these 5 areas, and then you get some extra credit for that. You're not going to get the fellowship just because you are in one of these areas, but every decimal point helps, because again, the success rates are extremely low. So anything helps. Of course, you need to understand the scope of the fellowship. If you compare, for example, here, the Marie Curie scope, basically they want someone doing research in any field. And by any field means philosophy, means economics, means biology, means anything. And they don't care if it's applied or not. Basically, it's very broad. They're not very restrictive in the type of person that can apply to the fellowship. Even if you look at the eligibility window is very large. HFSP, for example, is the complete opposite in that sense. They are looking for a very specific person, someone that is willing to do transformative research, high-risk projects, something that is basically paradigm changing, someone that is actually addressing an important problem or a barrier to progress to the field. So this is cutting-edge science. They're not looking for just run-of-the-mill science, and this is something you need to understand. When you read what they're looking for, we will see later that this is reflected in every step of the process. This is reflected in the eligibility rules. This is reflected in the selection process. This is reflected in the application process everywhere, because this is the type of person they're looking for. So you need to understand this at the beginning, because if you don't have these, then it's absurd that you apply, because you're wasting your time, you're wasting time of the reviewers, you're wasting the time of everybody for no reason. Yeah. And then Lymphoma Foundation is looking for anything related to lymphoma, whether clinical or fundamental biology about lymphoma. And it's just about lymphoma. That's what they are interested in. And you may work on a different type of blood cancer, and they won't care. That's how it works. Yeah. So you need to understand these things. This not only will save you time, it will also help you write your application. Yeah? Then emanating from these, it comes the eligibility criteria. Eligibility criteria, the first thing you need to understand is they are completely arbitrary. So they're based on 3 pillars. One pillar essentially is politics. So these countries, for example, they put money on the table. So there are mobility restrictions based on who pays for the fellowship. So if the fellowship is from a European funder, they want Europe to benefit from the fellowships. Yeah? So when they want people to come to Europe, and they won't fund fellowships going from Australia to Canada, because then that Europe won't benefit at all. Yeah. So that this is simple to understand. Yeah. There's politics that restrict the some of the eligibility criteria. Then the second one is the scope. The scope itself define the type of person you want in the fellowship. You may want to fund, for example, early career researchers. So then you put a limit on the number of years after your PhD which you can apply, etc. Yeah. And the third pillar that determines the eligibility criteria is the capability or the capacity of the funder. Yeah, if they can basically evaluate 2,000 applications per year, and suddenly they see that the trend is increasing and they're close to 3,000, and they're stretching to far beyond their limit, then they may say, well, then instead of being eligible 3 years after your PhD, you're eligible only 2 years. And that way you reduce the number of applications. Yeah. So these 3 things are basically the way the criteria are set up. That means also that then some of them are not logical at all. They're, as I mentioned, they're arbitrary. They're based on the particularities of the funder. It's not related to science or anything, and it's something you have to take, and that's how it is. So this is normally how we represent eligibility rules. These are the different aspects that are taken into consideration when looking at eligibility. And this is, for example, the example with Marie Curie. Marie Curie has an application window of 8 years after the PhD, so it's very wide. Even 8 years after you finish your PhD, you can still apply. In terms of mobility, international mobility is required. They want to promote international mobility. This is very typical of international fellowships. They have some restrictions, at maximum 1 year if you have already moved to the host country. You don't need publications to apply. That doesn't mean you're going to get the fellowship without any application, but you don't need them to apply. As you see, this is very open, and they want as many people as possible to apply. Yeah. Specifics of the goal. The specifics is that there's no specifics. Basically, all domains of research and innovation are eligible. There are restrictions here in terms of resubmission. You can resubmit only if you got at least 80% in the score. They changed these from 70%. They changed it last year because of the huge increase in the number of applications. There's 1 application per candidate. Then nationality, again, this is based on politics, as we mentioned before. European fellowships, meaning you're going to stay in Europe to do your work. Then you can be from any place in the world, because you're benefiting Europe by staying here and developing your work in Europe. If you want to go outside, then you can go outside only if you're European or you are a long-term resident. Yeah. Normally, this comes with the strings attached. In this case, you have to go back to Europe after a couple of years, so after 1 or 2 years. In this case, by the time you apply, you have to have a PhD. I'm not going to enter into the definition of what a PhD it is or is not for these guys. In some cases, you need to have a full document saying you're a doctor. In other cases, you may need just the thesis defense. That depends on the fellowship. Each fellowship has different ways of defining this. But in this case, you have to know that you need to have the PhD in order to apply. In other fellowships, like EMBO, for example, you can apply and then get your PhD by the time you start. Of course, to start a fellowship as a postdoctoral fellow, you need to be a doctor. That's obvious. But in the case of EMBO, you can apply before you get your PhD. So this is for EMBO. In this case, I'm just going to talk about some differences here. The application window is 2 years after the PhD. There's again, the mobility rules are quite complicated based on all these different rules based on the countries that are members of EMBO or not. And here they allow resubmission. They have changed that. Next year, they won't allow resubmissions anymore. That's again because of the huge amount of applications. In this case, you need a first author paper or a preprint published in a recognized preprint repository that is also peer reviewed. Yeah, there are some restrictions here. But as you see, the important thing here is not the specific details, but understanding that there are details that you have to pay attention to. Yeah, that they are different from different countries, from different fellowships. Also, look at the list of countries. There are countries in which you expect to be eligible, like Switzerland in Europe. Switzerland used to be eligible for Marie Curie. I mean, it's eligible for EMBO. For Marie Curie, was not eligible for a long time. Now they're eligible anymore. They're part of the European, as an associated country to the European Commission. So you have to pay attention to all these details. Yeah. So if we look at the selection process, basically the selection is based on the three aspects: the candidate, the host lab, and the project proposal. These are the three things that that basically every fellowship is gonna look for. In the case of Marie Curie, they make it a little bit more complicated because they look at these three things from three different aspects. They look at it from the point of view of excellence, which is essentially what you normally are used to, how good you are, how good your project is, how good the host institution is. But they also look about the impact, which is much more complicated because it's about the impact that the fellowship is going to have on you and on other people. Yeah, how you are going to develop your skills, or how you're going to affect the society, or in general your field, or innovation in terms of creation of wealth and new companies, etc. And then there's a small part which is quality and efficiency of implementation, which is essentially logistics. It's just to explain how you're going to develop your project and how good the place where you go is prepared to do that. Yeah. So essentially, it's the same thing. Is your project, the host institution, but they looked at it from three different aspects. That makes it very complicated. The good thing about this is that the selection process is very easy to follow. Basically, you submit the whole thing at the beginning. There's an eligibility check. Then they assign evaluators. In this case, the evaluators are people are basically volunteers. So they have a pool of volunteers from many different fields, essentially or ideally from all the potential fields. So someone that is relatively close to your topic will be assigned. Probably not an absolute expert on what you do, but if you are a cell biologist, you work on actin cytoskeleton, another cell biology will be 3 people are assigned. 3 cell biologists will be assigned to your application. They may not work specifically on the actin cytoskeleton. They might work on the tubulin cytoskeleton or on membrane trafficking, but they have an idea of what you work on. Yeah, and then they will provide a consensus. There will be a meeting with a discussion of the scores provided by these evaluators by a committee. There's basically a panel per topic. There are 8 panels. They will evaluate the comments from the evaluators, and then they will provide a list of people and the feedback to the applicants. Everybody gets feedback in this application. Then you can appeal if you have a problem with the procedure or eligibility or something formal, not a question of judgment. If they consider it's not good enough or it's not novel enough and you disagree with them, that's your problem. They're not gonna reconsider the decision based on that. It's just only on formal problems. Yeah. For EMBO is slightly different, and this is one of the things that the why it is important to actually pay attention to the process. Yeah. For EMBO, basically, what happens is that you submit your whole application, then 3 people are assigned to your 3 members of a panel of about 20 people. They will be assigned to your application. Essentially, 70 to 75% of the people will be rejected in this at this stage. There's a pre-screening. And if you pass this pre-screening, then you will be interviewed by an expert, an EMBO member, or someone from the Young Investigator Program. Then your application will be reevaluated based on the report from this person. Yeah? And then there will be a committee meeting, there will be a ranking of the people, and people will be informed. The problem here is that the first step of the evaluation, where 75% of the people are rejected, is based on a summary of the application. And if you don't pay attention to the process, you won't know, because you submit the whole thing from the beginning. In HFSP, for example, what happens is that you first submit a letter of intent, and you know it's a summary of the application. So it's clear that the first step, in which 80 or 85% of the people are rejected, is based on a summary. They tell you from the beginning, and it's very clear because that's what you submit. And then you have to be invited to submit the rest of the application. At EMBO, it's not like that. You submit the whole thing, and you may tend to think that people are going to look at the whole application, but that's not the case. The first step, in which 75% of the people are rejected, that's based on a summary of the application that contains basically reference letters, your CV, and a 250-word summary of your application. 250 words. So it's half a page, basically. That's what people are going to read of your project. Based on that, you're going to be cleared. So the problem is you submit the application, you prepared your project, the full-length project that you've been working for months on it. You've been you have worked with your supervisor, you have given to your friends, everybody has given you feedback. In the end, it's in pretty good shape. It's amazing. You submit it, and then when you submit it, you realize in the application window that you have to submit an abstract too. And then you say, okay, well, yeah, I write an abstract. I can do it right now. And then you write these 250 words on the spot in 5 minutes. And that's what's going to kill your application along with 75% of the people. So this is not hidden, yeah? This is in the instructions. They're not trying to catch you. It's clearly written in the guidelines, but you have to actually read the guidelines and understand the selection process. This is why it is important to understand this. Not only because people reading the application probably are not experts, and they're telling you that here, there's 24 people or 22 reading your application. The same happens with HFSP. They also have a panel of people reading the application. So the first step is not, it's very unlikely that you will find an expert on your specific topic reading your application that tells you how you have to read it. But also they tell you that for the first step, the important thing is 250 words. So pay attention to this. Yeah. Basically, this is just to summarize these. The evaluation process will help you write a competitive application. About 70% of candidates are eliminated by short form. Yeah, and this happens both in Human Frontiers and in EMBO. It's true that in Human Frontiers, you know that from the beginning because you have to provide a letter of intent. But in EMBO, you don't know that unless you pay attention to the instructions. And also, there's a high probability that these summaries will be read by a non-specialist. So you have to write them in a way that someone that is not an expert on your topic can understand them and can understand how important your research is. This is very important. So the application process, basically, you have to understand the mission, the scope, and the instructions, the eligibility instruction, and the selection process in order to write a good application. Just for the reasons we just mentioned, you have to adapt your application to the scope and the rules of each funder. Yeah. So the application process. This is just a summary. The application process from the EMBO postdoctoral fellowships is the application itself, 2 letters of reference, and 1 letter of acceptance from the FO supervisor. The important thing here is that the letters of acceptance and letters of reference need to be provided before you can submit your application. So the first thing you have to do when you apply to a fellowship is to identify who you need help with, who needs to provide information or documents for you, and then ask them in advance. So everything is there when you need to submit your application. This is critical. Yeah. Actually, the system doesn't let you submit unless this information is in already. Yeah. And the good thing is that they tell you that when you enter, the system has a set of alarms that is telling you this is incomplete, you have to submit this, you have to submit that, this field is empty, all these things. But still, make sure, because the rest of the things that are empty and you need to fill is up to you. But these things are not up to you. The letters of reference need to be written by someone else, and you need to give them time, enough time in advance, so they can actually plan to do it and do it well, because this is fundamental. For HFSP, for example, the application is different. It happens in 2 steps. First, you submit the letter of intent, as I mentioned before, where you submit a summary of the application along with some other documents. And then if they consider it worthy of funding or with potential, they will invite you to submit the full application. The trick here is that between the letter of intent and the full application, you have basically a couple of months. The letter of intent, you submit it in May. By mid or the end of August, you are invited to submit the full application, and you have until the end of September. So basically 1 month to do that, which means that you should be preparing this before. You cannot just tell your supervisor, hey, now you have to submit a letter of recommendation for me in late August, just before with 1 month before the deadline, because maybe they don't have time, especially in this case that the reference letter is quite special. They need to provide a lot of extra information that is not normally there in a regular reference letter. Yeah. So make sure that you identify all the parts in which you need help from other people and contact these people in advance. Yeah. So now Tiago is going to tell you about the Marie Curie application process, which is slightly more complicated. Sorry for the speed of which we're talking, but this is a lot to talk about, and we don't have enough time. So I'm going to stop sharing, and then you can share if you want, Tiago.
Okay. So do you see the slides?
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you, David. So we're going to go through some aspects of the Marie Curie application. It is a very difficult application. It's a prototype of an application where you need as much help as possible and where you should start as far in advance as possible. The minimum recommended time for preparing this is 3 months, and I can tell you that is not enough if you're starting from scratch, okay? Why go through it? Well, the Marie Curie has many advantages. One of them is if you would like to come to Europe or to an associated member state lab, there are no nationality restrictions. So there are as David mentioned, there are interests that govern who can go where. But if you are a good researcher, a promising young researcher, and you want to come to work in a lab that's in the MSCA Horizon Europe area, there are no nationality restrictions. So that's a fantastic advantage. I'm originally from Brazil. I'm eligible for this as a Brazilian citizen, and I believe all of you listening to this are. It is also a fellowship that gives a lot of support for things like moving, for family, if you have special needs. So as we drag you through this, please keep that in mind. It's a painful process. I know more than one person that gave up in the middle of it because they obtained other funding and decided not to go through with it. But it does have excellent support, and it is open to essentially every nationality, at least that David and I are aware of. So it's a long application. You will need help. It starts with an administrative section, which I don't think we need to spend any time on here, but it's basic information, budgets, the project titles, the abstracts, all these things. Unlike the EMBO process, the abstract doesn't really matter here. The reviewer will always have the full-length application, so it's only for the public-facing part of your project if it is approved. The issue starts in Part B, which is what the reviewer is going to focus on, Part B1 and Part B2. Part B2, we're not going to go into any detail today, but it's your biographical information, your CV, plus information on the institution. So material conditions, equipment, administrative support conditions. You will receive that most likely from the host institution. They usually have these things prepared as templates in Europe. But Part B2 also will include your CV, which is free form. And unlike the Part B1 that we're going to go through in a second, it has no page limit. So why is this difficult? Well, so David showed you this, and it looked already like a 50% focus on science, which would be the excellence. But actually, even that's not true. The excellence includes a lot about things like career development, about exchange of knowledge. So actually, this is an application that, as David said, has a cutoff, had a cutoff in the last call over 96 points out of 100. So you cannot neglect any area of it. And even the excellence area does not have a absolute focus on the quality of your project. So if you decide to engage with the Marie Curie fellowship application process, be aware from the beginning, the quality of the project is going to be a very minor part. Not a very minor, but it's not going to be the majority of your grade. It is mathematically impossible to not pay attention to what we're going to talk about now and get a Marie Curie fellowship, including because there are minimums in every area. So excellence will include the project and its state of the art and what the potential is for your project to really take it to the next level. But there are a lot of other things in here that you may not have considered part of scientific excellence of your project to begin with. For example, Horizon places a very strong premium. Horizon is the framework that governs Marie Curie, the overall funding framework for science in the EU. It places a premium on open science, for example. So you have to have a plan for dissemination and communication that includes open science. The excellence part has to include also some very detailed description of your training and how you will improve if you get this fellowship. It also requires that you focus on what's called a two-way transfer of knowledge, which is something that candidates often fail in, which is not just to say, I'm going to this lab at Pasteur Institute to learn antibiotic development for next generation antibiotics. You also have to say what they'll get from you. So what will the lab and the institution gain from having you there? They will look at the match between your qualifications and the project. For this, they will rely both on Part B1 and on the CV that you add to Part B2, which is the supporting document, and the quality of the host lab. So there's quite a bit here that you have to do when you write the excellence section, which is not just what you would focus on in a regular application, which is developing the best possible project. And on top of that, you have these two other sections: impact, which counts for 30%, which is something people struggle with because you have to write about how this will have an impact, not just on science and so forth, but you have to focus how it will have an impact on you. And this has to be credible and detailed. It can't say this is an outstanding lab, and if I publish good papers here, I will for sure have a job. You have to, as much as it may turn out to be a fiction, you have to write and tell a credible story about the kinds of skills you will acquire there, both hard skills, scientific skills, and soft skills, and how these will make you more, for lack of a better word, employable in the future. You will have to seek help from the host institution to put together a dissemination and communication plan to maximize impact. This is extraordinarily difficult to do in the frame of a postdoc project. No one really expects you to put this plan together on your own, but it means that you need to contact the future host institution very quickly as soon as you decide to apply for this project. They will need to help you develop this. You'll have to put forward a communications plan, not an intention letter saying, I believe that communicating to society is very important for science. No, you'll have to explain how. And communication and dissemination are treated separately here. So dissemination is how it spreads in the research and development community, and communication is going to be how it gets out into society. You'll have to discuss the exploitation. It doesn't have to be for profit, but you'll have to discuss the potential for impact of your project and the potential societal impact. This is a lot. No one will retroactively come back and evaluate the outcome on this, but it will be scored basically on plausibility. You'll have to write here a story that is believable for a reviewer. And finally, a step where a lot of people fall down, the quality of an implementation, which is 20%, which is a detailed work plan. All of you, if you're in this seminar, you've probably spent a lot of time in the lab, so you know that unexpected things should be expected all the time. So again, what we're looking at here is plausibility. You have to present a detailed work plan, including a time chart in the form of a Gantt chart, meaning how over the years of the fellowship, which months and how many man hours you will dedicate to each task, including things like communication and your training. And the application will be scored on internal consistency. So if in work package 3, you say that you are going to spend a lot of your effort in building, for example, a database that makes your new genes of interest accessible to science community independent of language, for example, and you estimate that that will take months, that will have to fit in there somewhere. You can count in things like technical support from technicians and collaborations, but people frequently here put in a work time distribution that is either completely unrealistic for anyone, or if you do the math, will amount to somebody proposing to work 360 hours a week, for example, because they've just piled one task onto another. And these things are scored for plausibility. The other part here is the host lab and institution. So they will be also providing supporting information in Part B2, which should be detailed and help make the case that you can do the project at this institution. Again, this is a specific scoring item. These two things will be worth 20% of your final score. Part of it you will need help for sure, because one of the things they score, because after the application, administering European grants is itself a heavy bureaucratic task, is the administrative history of your host institution dealing with European projects in general and MSCA grants in particular. So all of this you cannot do by yourself. If you decide to engage with this, you need to contact the host institution. The good news is you should not be shy about this. If you are awarded a Marie Curie Fellowship, your host institution will get about 1,700 euros a month per month per postdoc they get. So there's an enormous financial incentive for the institution to collaborate. And most European institutions have templates in place for the institutional parts of this and for things like communications program. So engage with them early. They do have a lot of fine print. Pay attention to it. The Marie Curie generates a 10-page PDF for the reviewer of section B1. If the last page, if page 10 says at the very bottom, and taken together, this demonstrates that the cure for all cancer is absolutely, and then you run out of space and it's on page 11, the reviewer cannot take it into account. They will not have it. They will receive a PDF with 10 pages. That means people have tried to cheat using everything you see here in these instructions. You may be declared ineligible, or what they do, I guess, out of perversity. Actually, no, it has worse consequences, because if you score very low on this application, you cannot reapply in the following year, is reformatted according to the guidelines, and that puts you over the limit and below the limit for application in the following year. People have tried everything, like putting the entire application as a figure legend because the font size is smaller. It does not work. So if it made the instructions, it's because somebody tried it, They were caught, and they were either declared ineligible, which is actually the best case scenario, or the commission does reserve the right to reformat, push you over the limit, and then get you a very low score, which makes you not get this year's fellowship and be ineligible for the following year's application.
Sorry, Thiago.
Yes?
We need to take up the Q&A as well. So
Okay.
you can just wrap
I
up.
okay, I'll wrap up very quickly then.
Okay, thank you.
So I just want to get then to some questions we always get these days about AI. So all of these institutions have guidelines. Basically, they correspond to what you see here from EMBO. They ask you to disclose what you've used. They recommend that you use for grammar and semantics, but avoid generative functions. Some of them, like Human Frontiers, reserve the right to screen for AI. None of these tools are reliable, so be prepared here to litigate. If you use it extensively, it will not distinguish a translation function, which is legitimate, from a generative one, which is not. And one of the things the European Union reminds you of in several agencies is if you use these tools, when you're writing the proposal, it may include a lot of sensitive and preliminary information and preliminary data, things like candidate genes. These companies have a very bad track record on privacy, and you may either lose originality or, even worse, be liable for leaking human information into a commercial platform. So be very careful. The very last thing I want to say, I skipped over those slides in the interest of time, is when you're done with everything, we recommend to everybody always have two people read whatever scientific project you wrote, an expert and a non-expert. And they will give you different things. The non-expert should be listened to in particular because they will tell you about the clarity of your proposal, about things that are invisible to an expert that may really confuse a reviewer. And we'll stop here to be able to have questions. Sorry for the speed.
Thank you, David and Thiago. It was an insightful session. So we'll take some questions now. Okay, I'll just read out. There is one question by Aswati. MSCA can be applied only after joining, joining somewhere for the postdoc, because I see one criteria in your presentation that you have to be in your host country for maximum 1 year. Would you like to take that up, David?
Um,
I think
so
that was during your presentation, so I'm just.
yes, sorry, I was looking at the questions. I have different questions that
So,
Yeah,
David, the question
there are
was,
some questions in the webinar
ah,
chat box also, and Q&A session as well.
but
okay.
the question was, do you have to be in the future host lab to apply? And the answer, just to jump ahead, is no. Actually,
Mhm.
what David mentioned is that the maximum you can be in the host lab is 12 months. So these are mobility fellowships. So actually, you should ideally not yet be in the future lab or even the
Mhm,
future
mhm.
country, but they will tolerate up to 12 months. But they are mobility fellowships. So mobility is a plus, not a minus. So what David mentioned is the absolute limit before you make yourself ineligible in the application. Sorry to
Yeah,
jump.
and not all the fellowships is 12 months. Yeah, you have to check the specific rules. And in some cases, for example, it's 6 months. And as I mentioned before, this is arbitrary. For some fellowships, they consider 12 months is like you have been already, you're applying from the host lab, and that's not allowed. And from
Mhm.
others, it's just 6 months. So pay attention to the instructions.
Sure. Thank you. Fennel asked, in general, how often do host labs have their postdoc fellowship in US, West Europe? Do most places require an incoming postdoc to apply for a postdoctoral fellowship? I'm sure you have answered in your eligibility section, but.
No, that depends a lot on the lab, if it has basically soft funding or not. What's very common is an agreement where you join the lab. The lab will fund you for a certain period, and you commit to apply for your own funding during that period. That often includes not just fellowships, but sometimes helping the PI write grants, which include funding for postdocs. But it really depends on how much free money the lab has. One of the things we emphasize in the long course is that the free money situation of a lab can change very quickly. So if you don't have your own fellowship, even if things were okay, the PI may not be able to keep you if you don't have your independent funding.
I hope that answers your question, Fenil. So now we want one, okay, we'll take up the questions from the people who have raised their hands. Barbara, you have raised your hand. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask the question? Barbara? Okay. In the interest of time, I'll just take up another question then. When applying for EMBO, does having published a first author article with an accepted article make a difference? David, Tiago?
No, it doesn't. The accepted or published is the same technically. The only thing is that if you have an accepted article, they may ask you to provide, if that's the only proof of eligibility, you need to have at least one paper published or preprint, peer-reviewed, preprint. They may ask you for proof of that, like a letter from the editor that says the paper is accepted, but it counts exactly the same. There's no difference.
So the answer is no then. Okay. Okay, I'll just unmute and allow to talk Mohammed Altamesh. You can ask your question. Okay. Think they are not able to.
It seems they're having trouble unmuting.
Maybe. Okay. We'll move on to the other questions then. Okay, Gauri Garpure asks, how do these fellowships score the impact of the proposal? Is it in terms of scientific output only, or also the outreach or knowledge dissemination to relevant communities or stakeholders? How can one anticipate or justify these at the proposal stage? David, Tiago?
David, you want to answer that?
Yeah, that depends on the fellowship. I guess you're here referring to Marie Curie Fellowship, which is the one we discussed. In that case, they specifically tell you in the instructions when you go to the application page, they tell you specifically how you have to answer that. Yeah. Of course, there are things that you don't know how it's going to happen because the impact will depend on your results and you don't know them yet. But you need to anticipate a series of things. For example, you have to provide a communications plan. That's something you have to do ahead of time. And it's a plan to communicate the results, whatever they are. Or in case you are developing, for example, a device, you may provide evidence or mention conversations with a company that will actually manufacture the device once it's developed or something like that. So there are, depending on the potential impact, you have to provide evidence in one way or another. Sometimes it's nothing like that. The only impact will be on the scientific knowledge because you're studying a very fundamental question, and that's it. The key aspect here, as Tiago mentioned, is feasibility. So it has to be reasonable. So if you say that you're working on cryptography and that will have an impact on generation of new passwords or new type of passwords for the future of internet security, I can believe that. But if you work on translation on the ribosome and you say, well, understanding how the next amino acid joins the chain will help us develop new cancer medicines, then I would say that's a long stretch. It may be the case in 50 years from now, but it's not obvious from what you're saying. Yeah, so it has to sound reasonable. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, there are some excellent questions, but in the interest of time, I would request if your questions are not being answered here, please email us those questions. We will try to share these with the David and Tiago. We can, get these answers over email as well. The other question, Shrestha Singh asked, in my lab, I have gained a lot of strong hands-on practical research experience, but publishing in high-impact journals, how much does this kind of publication profile affect the chances of securing a good postdoctoral position? In particularly Europe or through programs such as EMBO, how can one best demonstrate strong research potential?
Okay, so I think we should both answer that because I think that's I've seen in the chat it pop up
Yeah,
in others. So the general question of the impact
yeah.
factor and the journal prestige in this. Okay, so the rhetoric is that it should not matter at all, right? That is what everyone is trained to say
Mhm.
these days. Um, that is not true, and on the ground, just it's simply not. However, this means only that researchers have, and you know what they are in your field, a list of credible and respected journals. At the very top, we know what they are: Cell, Nature, Science, whatever the problems are, we don't discuss. But the sort of thing we've had a lot this question in groups in India, the sort of mid-level journal who has more 1 point in the impact factor kind of thing. I would say that matters not at all in any of these processes. It matters in some national calls where they actually do score, the impact factor versus or the percentile. We have not discussed any of those applications, but in that case, if it's in the rules, it's in the rules. But I would give David the chance to give his opinion here because this is a contentious topic. But I would say if you are in one of the journals that is considered good and respectable in your field at the end of a PhD, particularly if you are outside the main axis of science. Like if I'm from Brazil, for me to have a paper in Brazil in the Journal of Experimental Medicine was a much more impressive thing for many people, which I didn't have, by the way. This is a hypothetical. Would have been then a science immunology paper from a lab at Harvard where there were 25 of those papers that year. But now, when people start sort of impact factor shopping in journals that are essentially the same, that doesn't matter. Nobody I knows goes and checks if the Journal of Cell Biology is 1 point over the Journal of Cell Science this year, for example. They're both good journals. They're both respected journals. What really doesn't help is when is at the very lower level, kind of pay to publish journals where about volume, those can actually count against an application in a prestigious and certainly at later career stages, at a faculty application and a very competitive senior postdoc, they will definitely count minus. But there is no denying that the prestigious publication will help. But prestigious is a wider bar than people think, and it definitely doesn't stretch down to who's at 4.1 and who's at 5.6 in the impact factor. They're the journals you know from your field as intuitively good journals. Yes, that does help.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So another thing to take into consideration here is that reviewers are aware of where you're coming from, and they take that into consideration. I've seen discussions among panelists in which they clearly mention, well, for this person that comes from a poor country, a small lab, having 2 papers in a mid-level journal, it's actually a great achievement. It's difficult to do that. If you come from MIT in Boston and then in 5 years or 6 years or 7 years of a PhD, you publish only 1 paper in a low-level journal, that tells a much worse story than if you publish exactly the same and you are from a small university in the middle of Hungary or Africa or yeah, in places that are that don't have access to the technology or the expertise. Yeah. So that's taken into consideration. And it's usually, I have to say that for most postdoctoral fellowships, the number of papers of the applicant is not critical. I've seen at EMBO, for example, about 10% of the fellowships are given to people with just 1 paper. And it doesn't need to be a Nature or Cell or whatever. It's just a reasonable, good paper in a mid-level journal, a good journal, a paper in development, a paper in the EMBO journal, a paper in a Journal of Cell Biology, a paper in something with impact factor from 5 to 15, something like that. It's not super high, it's not bad, it's just a community journal, immunity, or the Journal of Immunology, or something like that. And that happens all the time. And that's 10%. Of course, there are people with more papers. People that have a lot of papers also have also fellowships. Yeah, it's not a problem. So it's not critical at this stage because it's your PhD. Even if you have, I've seen people with 2 papers in Nature being rejected because there were other reasons to take into consideration, like the knowledge of the field that you have, the how much you demonstrate that you can actually do what you are supposed to do, the interest of your project. All these things actually have a lot more weight than your PhD paper that might be the result of a bad boss. Basically, I mean, a PhD student usually doesn't decide by themselves the topic in which they're going to work. They join a lab. In many cases, they inherit a project, they start working on it, and maybe you are lucky and the project is amazing, and you end up with a very good publication in a high impact journal, or you do a good job and the paper, because the topic is not that interesting, or the technology you have access to is limited, you end up with what you end up. But that doesn't mean you're bad. It means that circumstances are what they are. So don't focus just on that. Try to make the best of the things that you can control, which is the project, the lab where you're going, all these things. Those things you can control. Your CV, what you have done in the past, you cannot change.
Thank you. I hope that clarifies so many questions that we had from the attendees. So with that, let's wrap the session because we have short over time, and I would really like to thank David and Tiago for this insightful session. I'm sure all the attendees would have found this useful and insightful. And I'm just sharing the feedback form. Do add in your feedback. That would be useful for our future sessions as well. And to all the attendees who we couldn't answer all the questions, but do write an email to us. We will try to get the answers for those as well. And this webinar has been live streamed, so you will get an email with the link, so you can view the eligibility criteria about various grants, fellowship that David and Thiago shared in the beginning. If you have missed it already, so you can view that, and please share your feedback as well. Thank you, David and Thiago, for your time and for this insightful session. Thank you, Momita, for all the technical help and for being here. I would like to, with that note, thank you to all the attendees for joining, and have a great evening and afternoon from to the other people who are joining from different parts of the world. Thank you. With that, I will like to close the session. Would you like to add anything, David and Tiago?
Well, I want to thank everybody, and I'm sorry we couldn't get to all the questions. I see in the chat
Yeah,
there
there are a lot of
are a bunch
questions.
of them. I hope we can follow up later and
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we can answer the questions in writing. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, the time was very limited. This is normally, as I mentioned before, a 2-day course in which we go into every detail of all the aspects that we have discussed here. But I hope you got the message that there's a lot more than just the science when you are applying to a fellowship. Yeah, the same applies to a grant or any other thing. You have to pay attention to all the other details.
I think that's the main goal of this kind of session, is so that people who have great projects and could do great science don't get lost because they don't understand the process. When David and I applied for these things, the process was much more forgiving. Now, because of all sorts
Very
of
competitive.
contingencies, it's absurdly competitive. So it's going to be unfair often. So the only thing you can do is make sure that you tick all the boxes and then have a great project. There's no way, there's no other way these days. It's just too competitive. So this really rewards attention to detail, understanding the process, and reading calls carefully.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank
So
you.
with that, I will end the session. Thank you all for joining us today. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.
Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
We can end this.